In Tolkien's Middle-earth, the nature of evil takes many forms, each driven by unique motives, powers, and histories. Sauron and the Balrog, known as Durin's Bane, though originally allies under the Dark Lord Melkor, or Morgoth, followed distinct paths in their pursuit of darkness. Sauron, once a Maia of Aule, became Melkor's most cunning lieutenant, skilled in manipulation, strategy, and subtle influence. He envisioned a world under his control, crafting the One Ring to dominate the rulers of elves, men, and dwarves. In contrast, the Balrog of Moria, a creature of shadow and flame, embodied Melkor's primal wrath and chaos. After Melkor's defeat, Durin's Bane retreated into the depths of Moria, a force of instinctive terror with no desire for domination beyond its lair. This exploration delves into why Sauron did not transform into a Balrog-like creature upon joining Melkor, the reasons behind Durin's Bane's passive existence, and why it never allied with or opposed Sauron's rule. By examining their roles and motivations, we gain insight into the complexities of dark power in Middle-earth and how these different shades of evil shaped the fate of the Third Age. The nature of Sauron and the Balrogs. To understand why Sauron didn't become a Balrog when he joined Melkor, we first need to explore the origins and inherent traits of both Sauron and the Balrogs. Both beings were originally Ainur, divine spirits created by Eru Ilúvatar before the formation of the world. Within this divine hierarchy, some Ainur were more powerful and complex, becoming the Valar, while others, like Sauron and the Balrogs, became the lesser spirits known as the Maia. Although they shared this divine origin, Sauron and the Balrogs developed very different characteristics based on the roles they took up under Melkor, later known as Morgoth, and this shaped their individual forms, powers, and objectives in Middle-earth. Sauron began as a Maia named Mairon, aligned initially with Aule, the Vala of craftsmanship and knowledge. Under Aule's guidance, Sauron honed his skills in creation and order, developing a deep admiration for structure, precision, and mastery over materials and forms. He was a brilliant student of crafting and manipulation, traits that defined his personality and set him apart from other Maia. When Melkor's influence reached him, Sauron's interest in power and control made him receptive to Melkor's ideas. Yet, unlike many others corrupted by Melkor, Sauron was less drawn by sheer admiration for power and more by Melkor's vision of reshaping the world through domination and control. Sauron saw in Melkor an opportunity to fulfill his own desire for order, even if it was through tyrannical means. Thus, his corruption was not instantaneous or merely physical, as with the Balrogs, but a philosophical seduction over time, appealing to his desire for mastery over others. In contrast, the Balrogs were Maia, who had turned to Melkor much earlier in history, lured primarily by his raw, overpowering strength and his unrestrained hatred for the light and harmony of the Valar. The Balrogs became true instruments of Melkor's wrath and fury. They were transformed by their loyalty and proximity to his destructive will, manifesting as beings of flame and shadow, embodying chaos and violence rather than any form of order or strategic control. Where Sauron remained a sophisticated and independent thinker, the Balrogs were consumed by Melkor's hatred, losing much of their original identity. This transformation was so thorough that they became literal embodiments of rage and terror, wielding fire like a second skin, their essence forever twisted into monstrous forms that signaled their role as enforcers of Melkor's raw power. Sauron's desire for control and his love of order distinguished him from the Balrogs, whose purpose was to serve Melkor's fury in direct and brutal ways. Sauron valued structure, even if it meant the domination of others, and this trait allowed him to maintain more of his original identity as a Maia, rather than devolving into a creature of pure destruction. He wasn't merely a follower of Melkor's fury, he was an ally in Melkor's vision, applying a level of strategy, manipulation, and intelligence that was beyond the capacity of the Balrogs. This distinction is crucial in explaining why Sauron did not become a Balrog. His ambitions were not rooted in rage or violence, but in the desire to rule and control. Even when he became Morgoth's lieutenant, Sauron's skills remained those of a master manipulator and strategist, not a mindless warrior. His role was that of a general or tactician, coordinating armies, corrupting kingdoms, and crafting schemes that went far beyond the brute force tactics the Balrogs embodied. Melkor's influence, therefore, affected Sauron and the Balrogs in profoundly different ways. Where the Balrogs became symbols of Melkor's wrath, Sauron became the epitome of his cunning and desire for dominion. Sauron's choice to stay in a more fair form when interacting with the elves, such as his guise as Anatar, Lord of Gifts, shows his reliance on deceit and subtlety, tools a Balrog would neither need nor be capable of using effectively. The Balrogs, in contrast, were Melkor's weapons, beings created to devastate and spread fear, not to influence or manipulate on a grand scale. This divergence of purpose also influenced their forms. The Balrogs took on shapes that reflected their internal state, monstrous beings of shadow and flame, incapable of concealment or subtlety. Sauron, however, retained a fair and deceptive appearance as needed, one that allowed him to maintain the illusion of an ally or a friend. His more enduring form reflected the strategic and manipulative nature of his evil, a far cry from the unleashed destruction embodied by the Balrogs. His powers became focused on domination through sorcery, crafting, and subversion, leading him ultimately to create the Rings of Power as a means of extending his control. In summary, the essential difference between Sauron and the Balrogs lies in how they each reflected different aspects of Melkor's will. The Balrogs embodied his wrath, acting as his instruments of immediate, terrifying destruction. Sauron, on the other hand, embodied Melkor's darker strategic ambitions. His transformation was one of intellect and ideology rather than form, which preserved his identity as a manipulator and tactician. This duality in the nature of evil within Melkor's service explains why Sauron and the Balrogs became so different, both in purpose and appearance, despite their shared origin as Ainur under the same Dark Lord. The fall of Melkor and the fate of the Balrogs. With Melkor's defeat at the end of the First Age, the Dark Order he had imposed was shattered, scattering his followers across Middle-earth. The Balrogs, once prominent among his most fearsome servants, were almost entirely vanquished during the War of Wrath. Some accounts suggest that many were destroyed outright in the final battles, while a few managed to escape into hiding, retreating to the deepest, darkest places in the earth to avoid discovery. These survivors, including the infamous Durin's Bane, chose lives of seclusion and isolation, distancing themselves from the unfolding events above. Durin's Bane, the Balrog that would later haunt the dwarves in Moria, remained buried beneath the misty mountains, dormant and patient. This retreat and passivity may seem surprising given the Balrog's once destructive roles, but it reflected a significant shift in the nature of these beings after the loss of their master. No longer bound to Melkor's command or united under his vision, these Balrogs had no larger purpose. They were disconnected from the organized wrath that had driven them, left to exist as solitary relics of a fallen power. Durin's Bane, for instance, hid for millennia, emerging only when disturbed by the dwarves' mining operations in Moria, suggesting it had no interest in influencing events or seeking domination independently. The Balrog's reclusive nature also hints at the limitations of its power outside Melkor's influence. Melkor had been the unifying force behind the Balrog's terror, directing their immense strength and fury toward his specific goals. Without him, their motivation diminished. Unlike Sauron, who maintained his ambition and ability to strategize, the Balrogs existed as primal forces of chaos and destruction. Durin's Bane was powerful enough to overwhelm foes, but lacked the strategic thinking that would drive it to target nearby realms like Lothlorien or Rivendell. It was a dormant, reactive power, awakening only when directly threatened or disturbed. In the absence of Melkor, the hierarchy and goals of his former servants dissolved. This explains why Durin's Bane, even once awakened, did not emerge as a proactive force in Middle-earth. Instead, it acted as a guardian of its lair, challenging only those who trespassed too close, as seen when it confronted Gandalf and the Fellowship. With no leader to direct it, the Balrog neither sought out new lands to conquer nor allied itself with other dark powers. Its motivations were primal and instinctive, a stark contrast to the calculated schemes that Sauron continued to weave across Middle-earth. Sauron's role as the new dark power. Following Melkor's fall, Sauron took up the mantle of Dark Lord, but his approach and methods differed profoundly from those of his former master. While Melkor had dominated through sheer power and inspired terror by unleashing creatures like the Balrogs, Sauron sought dominion through influence, persuasion, and the corruption of the hearts and minds of Middle-earth's inhabitants. This was exemplified in his forging of the One Ring, an object created specifically to bind and control the rulers of elves, men, and dwarves. Sauron's aim was not to destroy, as Melkor had done, but to rule, creating a dark empire under his own command. Sauron did not rely on beings like the Balrog of Moria for his plans. The Balrogs were powerful, but limited to causing chaos and fear, traits that were useful in Melkor's war-driven vision, but less so for Sauron's more intricate designs. Sauron was a master of subtlety and preferred to ensnare his foes through promises of power, tempting them into alliances they would later regret. He was less interested in raw destruction and more focused on subjugation, using his servants as extensions of his will rather than as autonomous forces of devastation. The One Ring became the ultimate symbol of this control, allowing him to extend his influence over the rings of power and their bearers. Sauron's manipulation of the elves through his guise as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, highlighted his preference for deception over direct confrontation. Durin's Bane did not challenge Sauron for dominance, likely for several reasons. First, the Balrog had no interest in rulership or strategic ambition. It was a creature of impulse and raw power, bound to its lair without desire for a greater role in the conflicts of Middle-earth. Sauron's power lay in his influence, fear, and control over lesser beings, powers that did not appeal to or affect a creature like the Balrog. Additionally, the Balrog's isolation in Moria suggests that it neither desired to ally with Sauron nor saw any benefit in opposing him. It was content to remain in its own domain, bound by instincts rather than by plans or ambition. Thus, Sauron likely saw no value in trying to enlist or direct the Balrog, and instead focused on allies he could fully control. Sauron's ability to raise armies, forge alliances, and dominate minds made him an entirely different kind of threat from the Balrogs. His power extended across the land and into the hearts of men, elves, and dwarves, manipulating them with promises and power rather than fear alone. His focus was on orchestrating a vast and lasting dominion over Middle-earth, a vision that did not align with the wild elemental chaos embodied by Durin's Bane. This separation of purpose is why Sauron's plans unfolded independently of the Balrog in Moria, who remained a dormant force rather than an active agent in the power struggles of the Third Age. In essence, while Sauron took up the position of Dark Lord, he reshaped the role into one of subtlety, influence, and control, a stark departure from Melkor's rule of force and fear. The passivity of Durin's Bane and Sauron's indifference to it reflected the profound changes in dark power dynamics after Melkor's fall, with Sauron embodying a new type of dominion that required no alliance with relics of his predecessor's reign. Why the Balrog did not attack Lothlorien and Rivendell. The Balrog, known as Durin's Bane, after being disturbed by the dwarves in Moria, showed no inclination to extend its wrath beyond the depths of its domain. While Sauron's power was expanding across Middle-earth during the Third Age, the Balrog chose to remain within Moria, indifferent to the nearby realms of Lothlorien and Rivendell. This restraint might seem surprising, as both elven strongholds were significant opponents of darkness in Middle-earth, and a Balrog could have posed a terrifying threat. However, several key factors help explain why Durin's Bane never ventured forth. First, the Balrog was primarily a creature of instinct rather than ambition. Unlike Sauron, who plotted extensively to extend his dominion, Durin's Bane was more a relic of raw power, existing within its environment and reacting when its territory was encroached upon. Without Melkor to command it, the Balrog lacked a clear purpose or direction. It had retreated to the depths of Moria long before Sauron's return to power and stayed there, dormant, until awakened by the dwarves. Even after its awakening, it showed no desire to act on its own behalf or to expand its reach, unlike Sauron, who thrived on conquest and influence. In this sense, the Balrog was bound by its ancient instincts, drawn more to guarding its lair than to actively seeking out new territories to dominate. Additionally, Durin's Bane's specific location within the darkened depths of Moria may have played a role in its isolation. The realm of Moria was vast and labyrinthine, creating a natural barrier between the Balrog and the lands of Lothlorien and Rivendell. Moria's complexity and the inherent darkness suited the Balrog's nature, a being of flame and shadow that preferred the deep, ancient halls of the dwarves rather than the open world. To venture outside would have required a complete shift in environment and purpose, and as a being content with its dark lair, the Balrog may have felt little motivation to cross into new, unknown regions like Lothlorien or Rivendell. Another important factor was the strength of Lothlorien and Rivendell themselves. Both realms were protected by formidable elven powers that the Balrog would have sensed. Lothlorien, under the rule of Galadriel, was fortified by her power and wisdom, while Rivendell was protected by Elrond, another powerful elven lord. The Balrog, though a creature of immense strength, was not invincible. It had faced defeat during the War of Wrath, and would likely sense the powerful protections within these elven realms. To engage such defenses would require more than its solitary strength, and without the strategic guidance of a leader like Melkor, the Balrog likely saw such attacks as unnecessary and potentially futile. In the end, the Balrog's confinement to Moria wasn't due to a lack of strength, but a lack of ambition and direction. Unlike Sauron, who thrived on manipulating and controlling other beings, the Balrog was a relic from an earlier age, more reactive than proactive. It stayed bound to its underground domain, more inclined to defend its lair against intruders than to venture out and conquer. Its attack on the Fellowship in Moria illustrates this defensive instinct. Durin's Bane responded only when confronted directly by trespassers rather than seeking them out in distant realms. The relationship between Sauron and the Balrog. Despite sharing a similar allegiance to Melkor in the First Age, Sauron and Durin's Bane had little to no direct interaction during the Third Age. Sauron, having assumed the mantle of Dark Lord after Melkor's defeat, was deeply strategic, seeking to consolidate his power by extending his influence across Middle-earth through the One Ring and the Nazgul. He had neither need nor interest in the Balrog hidden within Moria, whose chaotic power did not align with Sauron's more calculated approach. Sauron's plans centered around controlling and corrupting beings who would serve him willingly or who could be dominated by the power of the ring, while the Balrog remained a dormant, unpredictable force of destruction. Sauron would have known about the existence of the Balrog, but there was little reason for him to approach it. The Balrog was powerful, but it was also unpredictable and uncontrollable, lacking the subtlety that Sauron valued in his servants. Sauron preferred loyal minions, who could act as his eyes and hands across Middle-earth, such as the Nazgul, who were bound to his will through the power of the Nine Rings. The Balrog, by contrast, was a volatile force that could not be directed or bound in the same way. Any attempt to enlist the Balrog could have backfired, and Sauron, as a master manipulator, would see little benefit in trying to recruit a creature that thrived on chaos. Another reason for the lack of cooperation between Sauron and the Balrog is that their goals were inherently different. Sauron was consumed by his desire to rule all of Middle-earth, crafting a grand design to subjugate elves, men, and dwarves, The Balrog, however, showed no signs of any such ambition or vision. Its existence in Moria was rooted in survival and defense, tied more to its instinctive nature as a creature of shadow and flame than to any desire for power or control. While Sauron was fully committed to expanding his influence, the Balrog existed as a dormant and reactive force, content within its dark lair without any greater ambitions. Sauron's indifference to the Balrog also underscores the nature of his dominion. Sauron's power was far more centralized, focused on the rings and the enslaving of wills, an approach that required loyalty, not mere destructive potential. Durin's Bane would not have fit into Sauron's well-orchestrated plans, as it could neither be bound by the ring nor offer the kind of loyalty and obedience that Sauron valued. In this sense, the Balrog was a remnant of a different era, a piece of Melkor's brutal legacy that did not belong in Sauron's refined approach to conquest. Thus, the two remained separate forces, each operating within Middle-earth, but with no interaction or cooperation. Sauron's pursuit of power and order made him a stark contrast to the chaotic and aimless existence of Durin's Bane. The Balrog was an ancient force, driven by instinct and bound to its lair, while Sauron, with his complex schemes, embodied a new era of darkness. Their divergence highlights the evolution of evil in Middle-earth, from Melkor's forceful reign of terror to Sauron's cunning dominion. In the end, Sauron's path and that of the Balrog were parallel yet unconnected, as each pursued their own destiny, bound by ancient roots but divided by distinct ambitions and natures. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you enjoyed this exploration, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like to support the channel. See you on our next adventure.